Here's the thing. In the Northwest today, Erik Ten Hag and Jadon Sancho are set for face-to-face talks today to see whether or not a resolution can be found after last week's public fallout. Manchester United very much in the news at this time. talkSPORT's chief football correspondent is Alex Crook. Alex, good morning to you. What more do we know at this stage going into these face-to-face talks?
Good morning. As you say, Jim, never a quiet moment with Manchester United. They are very much in the news, but not for positive reasons. We had the Anthony situation over the weekend. He's been given a leave of absence from training to try and clear his name against these assault allegations. He's actually taken to social media overnight and posted details of some private WhatsApp conversations that he claims prove his innocence. I'm not sure that many lawyers would encourage him to do that. But in terms of Jadon Sancho, the non-international Manchester United players due to return to training at Carrington today, it's my understanding that meeting between Erik Ten Hag and Jadon Sancho is taking place even as we speak. I'm not sure that Ten Hag is going to be too impressed at that social media post that Sancho released after the Arsenal game last weekend, suggesting he'd been made a scapegoat by his manager, still features prominently on Sancho's social media profile. So he clearly feels like he needs to stand his ground. And I'm not sure Ten Hag is going to be particularly forgiving in this instance.
What's your take? Martin O'Neill, of course, is with us. Alex, what's your take on it in a situation like this, Martin, when there is an issue, and a serious one, between manager and player? You ever had something similar?
Yeah, I mean, yes, almost on a daily basis. Sometimes you leave players out of the side because you don't think they're up to the ability they suggest they should have. If this was to start off as if Ten Hag was actually answering some question or other, let's say at the press conference and asking about why Sancho wasn't in the squad, then I think he's probably entitled to say, well, I've left him out because I don't think he's really up to it, if that's the case. I would have preferred if that had been kept in-house.
Yeah, you wouldn't have gone public with that?
I wouldn't have gone public with that.
You wouldn't have done what Ten Hag did?
No, I think you would have had to have had the conversation with the player, and first of all, and pull him aside if the training, according to Ten Hag, his training that particular week wasn't up to scratch. Then you pull him in. You say, well, what are you doing here? What are you doing? But then the player goes up, and I suppose perhaps maybe will feel that he's been hard done by in that sense, and there's an answer now. If Ten Hag has gone publicly with it, then perhaps maybe Sancho has felt that he should go public with his answer, if that's the case. Now, here's the main things. First of all, I think Ten Hag, as I say, should have gone privately with him, pulled him in and asked him what he was doing. Secondly, Sancho, this idea that you're a scapegoat, I used to think about that myself as a player, when maybe Cloughie might have left him out of the team, and then maybe if I analysed it later on and realised, actually, he's probably a very, very good reason for it, if that was the case,
right.
Not just a scapegoat, but that was. However, that's from a player's viewpoint. Sancho himself has not done enough to warrant being in the side. He has just not done enough.
This is you saying this.
This is Sancho's job. First of all, I'd be asking, if I'm Ten Hag, I pull him into the office and I say to him, what do you think your job is here? What's your job? What have we bought you for? We bought you to go and take players on, not to run at them for 5 yards and then lay it 3 yards to the side for somebody else, supposedly with lesser ability. You're putting the responsibility onto them. Your job is to take players on and beat them. If your best position is wide left, coming in on your right foot and taking players on, or going past them, edge of the penalty area, that's what I would be doing, and I would be doing that. Yeah. And I would have him out in the afternoon doing that sort of practice to get him, because these cost the football club almost £80 million. And if you had seen Sancho in his last season, now I know there might have been reasons for it. His last season at Dortmund, you would have been reluctant to pay that type of money for someone.
Sure. And Simon, you would like your manager to do just what Martin has said.
I would imagine that there's a distinct possibility he may have already done that. I mean, don't forget, this is a manager that took it upon himself to send him over to Holland last season when there were alleged challenges about the state of his mental well-being. So he didn't go somewhere else. He went somewhere that clearly Ten Hag must have arranged, because Ten Hag is Dutch and he went to a Dutch place. There's no reason for Jadon Sancho to go there. My bigger issue is I don't think it's advisable that a manager, it doesn't need to air his dirty laundry in public. I think that's the beginning of an end of a relationship, and also showing that you're floundering in your control over players. But the point beyond that is, I'm not entirely sure why the player thinks that he has a right to respond in the public domain either. Because this is the manager of arguably the biggest club in English football. And if he's decided that you're not training well enough, then he's the manager. And a player now having the right to respond, I'm not suggesting that this is the times of Bob Lord and everyone should fall in line and ultimately it's a mill baron that owns a football club. But when you've got players that have just come back and basically said the manager's making me a scapegoat, there can't be any respect for the manager's position, because I'm sure Ferguson wouldn't have done it, but if Alex Ferguson had said something or Martin O'Neill had said something about one of his players, I'm not entirely sure they'd have been particularly happy if that player decided to go back in the media and completely contradict what's been said by the manager and show no acknowledgement. But here's the thing, Jim. If he says the player's not training properly, guess what? The player's not training properly, and the player can sod off. It's the manager's standards that are the more prevalent, not the players.
So it seems, Alex, like from what the fellas are saying here, there's only going to be one winner, and it ain't going to be Sancho.
Well, I think we've seen that with Ten Hag previously. The way he treated Ronaldo. Also, we forget that he dropped Marcus Rashford for a game against Wolves last season because he was late for training. Rashford's response was to come off the bench, score the winner, and then hold his hands up. I think there's a startling lack of awareness from Jadon Sancho with that tweet. This is someone who started 56 games for Manchester United. If Jadon Sancho was on this programme now, I'd like to ask him, how many of those 56 starts do you think you impressed in? The answer's very few, if any. And I think Ten Hag, as Simon's alluded to, I think he feels particularly aggrieved because he's tried the arm around the shoulder tactic with Sancho. He tried to help him out by giving him time away from the football club. And I think he feels like it's been thrown back in his face.
Now, another day at Manchester United and another day of ownership by the Glazers. And last week, the fellow to my right in his column, I didn't exactly take much of a swipe at the Glazers. The debate goes on about their style of ownership. You didn't hang about over the weekend, Alex, did you? Have a listen.
They've gone from being the powerhouse in English football, one of the powerhouses in European football. They're not even the powerhouse in Manchester or the North West now. Liverpool and Manchester City have both overtaken them. Arsenal in the last couple of years have overtaken them. Chelsea, if they get their spending right, really should have overtaken them when you look how much money they spent since Todd Boehly came in. And then you've got clubs like Newcastle and maybe even Brighton, who are much better run by someone who does care deeply about the football club in Tony Bloom than the Glazers. They are falling behind, and all the time the Glazers are there, these parasites right at the top of the food chain, it isn't going to get any better because they're not interested. And I don't want to hark back to Ferguson because people will say, well, you know, he's not there anymore. But none of this would be happening if Sir Alex Ferguson and David Gill were still there. The dereliction of care of that football club, the stadium's falling apart, the training ground isn't up to scratch when you compare it to the likes of Manchester City. I can't find anything positive to say about the Glazers.
Parasites, Alex. You very much got them in your sights now, haven't you?
Well, Jim, I've been on this programme with you on numerous occasions. You've tried to get me to praise the Glazers. You know it isn't going to happen. I don't think Simon and I are too far removed, actually, in our viewpoint, because I think he was saying on this show last week that the Glazers are not there for the love of the football club. They're there for money. And I understand that. Football, particularly in the Premier League, it is a business now. But I've dug out some stats when it comes to the Glazers compared to other owners. You look at the money that Manchester United has spent on their infrastructure in the last decade. It's around about £140 million. Compare that to Manchester City, £375 million. Tottenham in that time have built a brand new stadium and training ground, £1.4 billion. Just think about that when you look at the stick that Daniel Levy gets. The Glazers have taken £154 million out of Manchester United in dividends over a 9-year period between 2012 and 2021. That's more than any other Premier League owner. Meanwhile, the debt has soared to £1 billion. This is a football club.
Yeah, but that's a false character. First of all, Alex, that's a false character. That's a false characterisation.
Yeah, but Simon, to be fair, we did see some of these stats in your column in the Mail last week.
But it's a lazy characterisation because £300 million worth of transfer payments that are due in years to come are the same thing that most football clubs carry on their balance sheets. They all pay players over a period of time, so it's a lazy analysis to turn around and say it's £1 billion.
What about the interest payments, Simon? The interest that Manchester United are paying on the loan.
No dispute about the structuring that people don't like. You can also look between 2003 and 2013 when they spent £423 million on players over a 10-year period with a net spend of I haven't finished yet, Alex. And a net spend of £200 million. And then you can look at the next 10 years from the Glazers, who've spent 1.7 billion quid.
Yeah, but Simon, has Alex not got a point this morning in that Manchester United fans, as a collective, would be right to ask, what is there to like about the Glazers?
I'm not suggesting there was
Their
any
style of ownership.
I'm not suggesting that if you're going to judge it by the standards of Man City, it's a ridiculous analysis.
No one's judging them by the standards
They're
of Man
not even
City.
a powerhouse.
But, as a one-off,
Do you want to answer it for me?
what is there to like about them?
Well, are we in a likability contest then? Is that what it's about? Because the analysis of powerhouse across Manchester City have done something in the Premier League that no team has done in the history of the Premier League. So comparing that as an analysis is a really easy discreditation of what United are doing.
What about Liverpool then, Simon?
What about Liverpool? They've won one Premier League in 30 years.
Yeah, but look at the investment on Anfield. They've improved the stadium. What have the Glazers done to improve Old Trafford and Carrington while they've been there? I was watching the Newcastle documentary.
I'm not you're positioning it as if I'm a Glazer apologist.
Ground.
It's very easy for Man City to spend money on a stadium they didn't have to buy. Man City moved from Main Road, trousered the money and moved into a free stadium. So let's have it right. If we're going to compare and contrast, Manchester United have not done what arguably most people would have thought they would have done. But generationally, they've lost a manager that's irreplaceable. They lost a chief executive that was very, very good at his job in David Gill. And then they've come up against a landscape of football that is very different to previous situations in their history. There's not been a Manchester City in people's history before. Arsenal were a great side, but they weren't Manchester City. So when we compare and contrast and we look at it, I think the Glazers have loaded it with debt, bought a football club in a business way that people don't like, and I get it. And I think ultimately they've got to be responsible, but they're not the only reason. They're not the only reason why Man United have suddenly fallen off the radar.
Is Alex right to call them parasites?
Depends what you define a parasite as.
Someone who leeches and just takes money out of the football club with no real interest on success on the pitch. I'm going to use your terminology as well, Simon. You talk a lot on this programme about best in class. Do you think Ed Woodward was the best in class at Manchester United? The Glazers stuck with him to make big football decisions for too long.
Depends
I'm not
which part of the class argument you're making. If part of the economic value of a football club is to drive the revenues and build it, then you'd have to say Woodward is. As far as a football operator, clearly not. But then you have to look at those so-called... This is what people want. You want Mourinho in your dugout. You want Louis van Gaal in your dugout. They went and spent £1.7 billion. Where do these guys get to come off with the outcomes that they didn't achieve? Because if the intellectual capital is the football manager choosing his players, then they are in the mix as well. Of course the Glazers are in the mix because they're the ultimate authority. But they're not the only reason why Manchester United at this moment in time aren't a particularly aspiring, aspirational football club.
Good effort though, Alex. You're off for a few days. Bet you enjoyed that. It's 11:20.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.